In this video, we'll have a look at how to create this unique Cinema 4D render without using any third-party plugins. Now, this effect isn't actually very hard to pull. There are just a few things that you need to keep an eye on, and you need to think slightly outside the box to achieve this result. And that's what I'm going to show you in this video. Right, in order to achieve this effect, we're going to need to create an object or a couple of objects onto which we can shoot some particles, and the particles will just travel along the surface of the objects. Let's start with something simple, maybe a sphere. And let me add a couple of more segments to this so it's slightly smoother. Say instead of 16, we'll have 60 segments. And we want to turn this sphere into a set of vectors onto which we can shoot the particles, and we can then use the direction of those vectors to drive the position of the particles. This will all make sense in a second, so bear with me. One of the easier ways of turning an object into a vector field is by dropping the object into a volume builder. So if I drop the sphere into a volume builder, I can change on the volume builder the volume type from a signed distance field into a vector volume type. And now we have, instead of voxels, we have these vectors. And the density of these vectors can be controlled by the voxel size here. The smaller the number, the denser the result's going to be, just like normal voxels. The smaller numbers here will make the vectors denser as well. So if I set this to, let's say, 1 maybe, it's quite a dense setup. But depending on how close you want to get to this, you might still see some gaps, like this. If you want this to be even denser, you can lower this down, let's say to 0.5 maybe. If you go too low with this, you'll actually get a warning. It will say this might take a little while, do you want to continue? It will still work if you press OK. It will just take a little while here, you can see it's working on it. This will be a bit more accurate, but slightly slower to process. I'm going to set this back to something higher, let's say 0.5. And what I want to do now also is to randomize this field a little bit. For that, I'm going to add a random field. And if I drop the random field into the volume builder, you see the field becomes a box, like that. Instead of having a box, you actually can change the way the field is created. So you can randomize the existing vectors here. So if I select the volume builder, the random field here, I can change its creation space from a box, which is what this one here is, to the second option, the objects below option. This will now combine the random field with the objects below, in this case just a sphere. So the vectors that make the sphere are now randomized. But if I increase the voxel size here, you'll see a problem. If I go and set this to something quite high, let's say 5, the vectors are shooting in every which direction. Now, since I want to use the vectors to drive the position of the particles, I can't have them shooting outside. What we need to do is to create vectors that go along the surface of the object. That's what this cross mode here is for. If I change it to cross, you see the vectors now follow the shape of the model. So if I zoom in here, you see these go along the surface of the object, whereas before, if I change this back to normal, the vectors are shooting in every which direction. I'm going to change this back to cross. This is quite important, otherwise the effect I'm going to show you will not work. Let me zoom back out. And let me make the voxels quite small again, let's say 0.5 or 0.6. There we go. This pattern that you see here will be driving the position of the particles. This is quite a dense and high frequency pattern. If I change the random field's scale from 100% to something larger, you see the pattern gets quite large as well, like this. So now this would be a free-flowing shape almost. So this looks nice. You can change this to whatever you like. If I change this to, let's say, 1500, that's even smoother now. But I don't want something that smooth, so I'm going to set this back to, let's say, 750. And everything we'll create will stay parametric, so we can change these numbers later on as well. And what I want to do now is to shoot some particles onto the surface of this object, and the particles to be attracted to the vectors that we have here, and travel along the vectors. So let me go and create a particle emitter first. And since the radius of the sphere is 100, let's just double check, it's 100. If I move the emitter back, let's say in this direction, by 100 as well, so if I go to coordinates, z minus 100, that's sitting right on the surface of the sphere there, like that. That's also going to be quite important. You can't have this particle emitter too far away from the surface here. You see what that does later on as well. And what I'm going to do now is to, if I just play this, is to get these particles to be stopped by this field that we have here. Let me first go and increase the number of particles we have, so it's easier to see what's going on. So I'm going to go to the particle here, increase these, let's say from 10 to, say, 150. on both the viewport and the renderer. I'll also increase the overall time we have, something like that. And also the stop emission of the particles to be quite high, so they don't stop basically. And I'll go back. And you see, if I just turn off the volume builder for a second, you see the particles will just shoot in one direction like that. And I want these to be stopped by the surface of the vectors here that's inside the volume builder. So I'll stop the playback, go back to the beginning. For that, I'm going to go and add a field force to the scene. So I'm going to go to Simulate, Forces and Field Force. Now we need to tell this field force what object or field that it needs to use to drive the position of the particles. Now that can be vectors, and the vectors are now inside the volume builder. So I'm going to drop the volume builder in here to the field. And since this is a volume object, I'm going to choose volume object here. Let me enable this again. If I play this now, you see not much is happening. If I actually increase the strength, you might see some difference here. I'm going to play again. You see when the particles hit the surface here, they just fly in different directions. Let me explain what's happening. These particles that hit the surface are hitting the surface on a vector, so they collide with a vector, one of these colored vectors. And based on those vectors, the speed of the particles increases. If I change the velocity type from add to velocity, to change direction, if I go back and play, this only changes the direction, but it doesn't increase the overall speed of the particles. If, however, if I stop this and go back, we change it from change direction to set absolute velocity, I can now drive the strength of those particles by just changing this number. If I change this, let's say, to 5 again, not much is going to happen. So the particles are actually stopped by these vectors. Then just go and turn off the volume builder so we can see what's happening. You see the particles stop when they hit the vectors. But if I increase the strength, you see they start flying or traveling along the surface of those vectors. So anytime the particles hit those vectors, they start flying around them. If I change this to be even stronger, you see the particles will fly around or along the surface of those vectors. I'll stop the playback, go back to the beginning. I'm going to make the volume builder visible again. I'll make the emitter here slightly smaller, so I'm going to select the emitter, down to emitter here, change the size to, let's say, 25 by 25. If I turn off the volume builder again, play again, and if I select the field force, change the strength, not much is happening now. There's some movement you can see, but really subtle movement. The reason why not much is happening is because the particles aren't actually touching those vectors, because they're flying way too fast. So if I select the emitter, come down to particle, lower down or actually stop the speed of this. So if I go down to the speed, change this back to 0, so the particles don't shoot through. They're just created on the surface and they just stop there. If I go back and play, you see the particles will now follow the surface of the sphere. Let me lower down the field force a little bit. So I'm going to bring the strength down, so it's slightly calmer. And here's the cool thing. If I stop this and then enable the volume builder again, you can kind of see a pattern that these are following, but it's really hard. So in order to make this easier, what I'm going to do is to create one more sphere, which is exactly the same as this one. I just duplicated the field force there by mistake as well, so I'll undo this. Select just the sphere and then duplicate this with Command Drag. And this sphere I'll just make black. So let me create a material. Drop this over to the sphere. I'm going to make this material completely black, so on the basic I'll turn everything off. And I'll actually turn off the volume builder as well. So we just see the particles traveling along the surface of that sphere. Another advantage of doing this is I can actually now select the emitter and snap it to the surface of the sphere that I just created. You couldn't snap this before to the volume builder, but I can snap it to this new sphere here. So for that, I could use maybe the place tool. And the place tool by default, if I just make sure that this moves around, will move the object like this. And as I go back, as it plays, if I move the object with the place tool so it remains on the surface of this, you see different particles are being created in different places. If I fly around, I could just do this. The great thing about having a setup like this is I can now turn these particles' paths into splines. That's really easy. If I select the emitter, which is creating the particles, and if I now create a tracer object, and if I go back and play, the emitter here will now create traces if I select it with my place tool here. As I move, you see the emitter is now creating these particles which are then being traced in different places based on where I drag my cursor. I can stop. Let me reframe this by pressing H. Let me actually close the material manager as well. And if I go back, play again, as it plays I'll just click and drag with the place tool so it stays on the surface here. Let me stop this. The actual pattern that we get here is the pattern of the random field. So if I select the random field, and let's say if I change the noise type from Perlin to something like Zada, go back and play again, you see this looks completely different now. I think we have way too many particles as well actually. Let me stop the playback, select the emitter, come down to particle, lower this down to let's say 60 by 60, go back and play again. And this is a little too fast as well, so they're a bit erratic. So I'm going to stop, go to the field force, drop down the strength to let's say maybe 120 or so. Go back and play again and select the emitter so I can move that around. I'm going to stop the playback. Let's test one more field. I'm going to enable the volume builder so I can actually see the noise. Go back to the beginning and then maybe turn the sphere off for a second. So it's just the noise that I'm seeing. I can select the random field. I can select the type and change it again, let's say this time to Booyah. That looks very dense and high frequency, so it might be interesting actually. Let's see if I turn off the volume builder, turn on the sphere, select the emitter, let's say put it here, play it. As I move it now, see this creates a different pattern altogether. I actually did like the Perlin, the default one, so I'm going to go back to the beginning, change the random field once again to Perlin. And if I play with the emitter selected so I can drag around, I'm going to create some interesting patterns like this. And once I have the right result, let me just fly to the back side, add a few more here as well, like that. And here maybe as well. And once I have a result that I like, I'll stop the playback. Let's say I want to render this now, because as it is, this is just a spline, so this will not render. When I try and press Command R, I'm going to see nothing. What I need to do now is to turn this tracer into either a set of polygons or into a hair object. Now you could do both. The polygons would be slower. So if I, for example, wanted to turn these into visible polygons, I could apply, let's say, a sweep. And then have a, say, an end side, which I'll make smaller. I can drop the end side inside the sweep and the tracer under the end side. This will now take a little while to calculate, but once it's done that, it's going to give me a set of polygons I can then render out. The end side here is a little too wide, so I'm going to select it again and make it quite small, let's say maybe 2 centimeters. Again, it takes a little while to calculate, but once it's done calculating, I should see a result like this. That's still a bit too wide, so I'm going to bring this down to let's say maybe 0.5 or even 0.3. So it's going to be much thinner now, like this, and this will render out. If I render this, we'll get a result. But of course, we now have way too many polygons. If I press Ctrl I, you see I have close to 2 million polygons. I'm going to come out of that. Instead, I'll take this out, delete the sweep. I can apply a hair material to this. Now I can either use the Cinema 4D's default hair material, if I open this up, come down to Create, Materials, and I can create a new hair material. The alternative would be to turn this into a redshift object. So if I go to my render settings first, change the renderer to redshift, come out of this. I can right click on the tracer and then go to render tags, and I can make this an RS object. And since this tag is applied to a spline, in this case the tracer, we have this curve option. In the curve, I can change the mode from disabled to hair strands. Let me open up the Redshift render view as well. So if I go to Redshift, render view, and if I preview this is what we have now. Let me just move this to one side. I can now change the thickness of the hair. If I make it thicker, you see the result here gets updated as well. I can make it very thin, like this. So it's really, really thin here. Let me zoom in to see what that looks like. There you go. And I can, of course, apply the scale graph. I can make it quite thin at the beginning. Quite thick, just by control clicking here, I can add one more point. Quite thick in the middle. And then thin again at the end. I can then level this out. And of course, you have some presets you can load as well here. I'll come out of this. And we don't actually need the global illumination for this, so let me go and turn it off. On the Redshift Advanced, I'll turn off the global illumination here, so it's a little faster to process. And what I'm also going to do is to add some color to this hair. So if I go to my Material Manager, create a new Redshift material, and double click on that. And if I search for the word hair, you see there's something called Hair Random Color. If I add this, I can now drive the base color of this material with the Hair Random Color node, like that. And now with this node, if I actually put this node editor down here now, and if I apply the material to the tracer now, you see that starts showing now here. Let me actually add a light to this as well. So I'm going to go and create an area light, let's say. And I'm going to create a target as well, actually, on that sphere. Of course, the target needs to be on the light, not the sphere. So I'm going to drag this back onto the light. And the target itself needs to be the sphere, like that. And the area light, if I go to the 4 views here, the area light is going to be lifted up, let's say here. Maybe slightly off here. There you go. I can make this slightly wider, like that, and maybe a bit bigger this way as well. And if you want to now change the color of this, I can select the hair random color, change the overall color here to whatever you like. And then to randomize it, you can come down to hue amount. As you increase this, starting from this color, the hue will be shifted by 23% or so. As I increase this a lot, that will cover the entire spectrum, so you'll have lots of different colors here, you'll see. This sometimes takes a little while to process, so if this ever happens, just stop the render and then restart it. And here we have the colors now. Let me come out of these views, so let me first close the node editor, and then go to full screen here. Maybe make a bit more space for my Redshift render view. And we'll reframe this as well. So we have the ball roughly in the center here. I don't want it to be this colorized, of course, so I'm going to select the hue amount and just drop this down to say maybe 0.3 or 0.4. Again, if it doesn't update right away, you can turn this off and then back on again, like that. Of course, since this is Redshift, I can add a Redshift camera. I can look through the perspective of that camera. And maybe actually if I go zoom in, say like that, I can turn the bokeh on as well. So in this camera, if I come down to optical, I can turn on the bokeh effect. And I can set the focus distance as well. Not by using this though. I'm going to click on this focus distance shortcut. Click somewhere here, let's say there. That becomes the focus distance. If I now come down and lower down the aperture, let's say from 8 down to say 2, things that fall in the background will be blurrier. Let me just exaggerate this a little more, let's say 0.5 maybe. So things will be even blurrier now when they're not in view. And of course we can add some effects, like if I go to lens effects, turn on the bloom maybe. So if I come down to override, if I bring the threshold down, I'm getting some bloom here, that's quite nice. I can maybe increase the intensity a little more. And then the softness a little more as well. I can also turn the flare on. And then bring its threshold down so the darker colors can be affected as well. Maybe there. I'll increase the intensity of this as well. And the size as well, so the flares here will be larger, like that. And if you feel like it, of course, you can add streak as well. So if I go to streak, override, bring the threshold down, we'll get these streaks now. If I now increase the intensity, that will be easier to see. So these are the streaks that we have, the tiny streaks. And in order to see the result, I'll do a bucket render to see the better quality. I think I'm pretty happy with the result, and in order now to apply this to a different setup, let's say for example, instead of having this sphere here, you want to have some text or something, you can easily do this. It's actually really straightforward. Let me just first come out of this camera, and also stop the bucket render so it doesn't take quite a long time. And for now actually, I'm going to go and get rid of this redshift render view. And what I'm going to do now is to replace the sphere with a different model. Let me close the material manager as well. And let's maybe create some text. I'm going to fly around. And maybe let's change the text. Let's say we write something like neon. Maybe a different font as well. Let's say maybe this one here. I'm going to add some rounding to the caps as well. Let's say maybe by this much. Let me just go and press NB to see the segments. Yeah, that's looking not too bad. Maybe a little rounder actually. And maybe a couple more segments. There we go. I'll turn off this light for now so I can see what I'm doing clearly. And I'm going to replace the sphere now with the text. Let me first put the text here. And I'm going to turn off the sphere here. And then the actual reference sphere as well, the one that we use to make the background go black. So I'm going to turn that off as well. I'll rewind back to the beginning. Inside the volume builder here, I'm going to drop my text here. The text, of course, has to be underneath the random field, like that. In fact, I can go and delete the sphere for now. I'm actually going to make the text a child of the volume builder as well, so that disappears as well because the volume builder is invisible. So inside the volume builder, the text is still here, so it's working. It's under the random field. But because the volume builder itself is invisible, the result's going to be invisible as well. If I go back to the beginning and play, you see the emitter here is doing something. But in order for us to be able to snap the emitter onto the surface of the text has to be visible first. Let me stop this. Now I'm going to go and take this text, create a copy of this by control dragging it down here. I'm going to apply the texture that I had on the sphere, the black texture, to the text as well. So the text turns black. But it's an actual object now, so I can snap this emitter to the surface of this. To do that, remember, you select the emitter, you get the place tool, and as you click and drag, you see the emitter snaps to the surface of the text. If I go back to the beginning and play, you see this is what's happening now. If I select the emitter here, and if I click and drag the emitter, you see I can get the particles to be created on the surface of this text now, like that. And this is already looking pretty good. Maybe I can have a few more on the end here. Let me zoom back out a little. I'm going to add a couple more here, just by dragging the cursor around with the place tool so that the particles are created on the surface of these characters, like that. Let's say I'm happy with the result, and I want to stop the playback now. Let me start my redshift render view to see what's going on. And I'll dock this here to the left. And let me look through the perspective of this camera. And then zoom back out a little. Let me start this render view. And give it some time. I'm going to center this properly. And the depth of field is working too hard. So I'm going to select my depth of field button here. Click on, let's say, the E. That's where it's going to focus on now. And here is what we have. Now, this is very art directable. What I mean by that is this. If I just pause this render view, let's say I want to have a couple of emitters here, and they create their own results right away. So I don't have to keep manually dragging this around. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. I'll select the emitter. With the place tool here, I'm going to drag the emitter, let's say, to this part of the N. But let's say I want to have one more copy down here. So that's really easy. With the place tool selected, and in the place tool, the clone mode is set to copy as opposed to instance. Instance is the default option, so you need to change this from instance to copy. Let me show you what happens if this remains on instance. If I select this, if I control drag a copy here, and then another one here, another one here, and another one here, I'm holding down control for this. You see, I'm now creating instances of this emitter here, which means if I go and play it, only the first one is creating particles. So in order for the others to create particles as well, I need to make them, instead of instances, copies. Let me delete these instances. Select the emitter. With the place tool selected, I'm going to change the clone mode to copy. So when I control drag this now, that creates another emitter here, and another one, and another one. So I'm going to create a couple of random emitters like this in anywhere you like. Let me just fly to a different angle. Let's say like this. I'm just holding down the control key now and just clicking around to create these emitters. Maybe a few more here at the top as well. Maybe one there, one there, one there. Maybe a couple on the side as well. And maybe a few on the back side, like that. And since these are copies now, if I play this, you see the particles are created from all of them, but only this one is being traced. So let me stop the playback. Go back to the beginning. That's because inside the tracer here, only the first emitter is being traced. So I need to add the other emitters here to the same list. To do that, I can go and lock this view. Select all the other emitters, starting from the first one, all the way up to the last one, and just drag them in to this list. Then unlock it so I can see what I'm doing. I'll play again, and everything should be traced now, like that. I think this is a bit too dense, so I'll stop the playback, and then select all the emitters again, starting from the top one, all the way down to this, and also this one here. I'll then change the overall particle count from 60 on each one to, let's say, maybe 30. And then play again. So I should have fewer particles now. That's looking much better, but I think we could add a couple of more particle emitters here as well. So let me stop the playback, go back to the beginning, select one of these emitters, doesn't really matter which one, and then control click here, with the place tool of course, so it's creating a copy. And this new emitter also has to be added to the tracer. So let me select the tracer, and then I'm going to add the latest emitter, which is this one, to the same list as well. And if I go back and play again, now these particles are being created as well. Of course, if you don't want all of these to be equal sizes, you can manually, let me stop this, you can manually override the sizes here. So if I switch back to my move tool here, and select this emitter, go to the emitter tab, I can increase the X size, or the Y size. If I go back and play again, there'll be a bigger area on which these particles are created here. Let me zoom back out. Now if I give this enough time to build up, I can stop the playback now, let's say, and refresh my view. Here's the result we should get. Let me press F here to make this slightly smaller. And I'm also going to set the depth of field as well. So I'll select the depth of field tool here. And then let's say click on this E. That's where it's going to focus on. There's way too many streaks here. So I'm going to go to the settings here. Let me just turn off the streaks for a sec. And I'll also bring down the bloom. Let's say the intensity of the bloom down. And also the flare intensity, I'll bring it down. And then come out of the settings. I don't quite like this empty area here, but that's quite easy. If I rewind back to the beginning, I just need to add a couple of more emitters here. In order to speed this up, of course, I would just go and stop the preview here. And I can zoom in here, select my place tool, and one of these emitters, let's say that one, doesn't really matter which one. I'll control drag that emitter here. Maybe control drag here as well. And let's see where else we can add a few more. Maybe here. Like that. That should do the trick, I think. If I now let this play. This is not working, of course, because we didn't add these particle emitters to the tracer. So let me stop the playback. Select the new emitters. I think it was this one. Let me just get my selection tool. It was that one. Shift select this one. And we'll select this large one as well. So these three here, they need to be added to the tracer. So if I come down to the tracer, lock this panel, and then scroll back up. Select these three emitters, and then just drag them inside the tracer as well. Then if I go back and play again, let me zoom back out. They should be creating particle traces as well now. Let me just fly around. Say here. And let's say I like this result. I'm going to stop the playback. I don't quite like how empty this area is. So I'm going to add maybe one more emitter here. So I'll select any of these emitters. Get the place tool. Control drag this here. So there's a larger emitter here as well. And then maybe here as well, actually. So we don't have huge gaps now. I'll go back. And you know what? I'm actually going to make this emitter quite large as well. So I'll select that one. Unlock this tab. Go to emitter. Make this quite large. So that covers all of these areas as well. And since it's covering a larger area, I might as well add a couple of extra particles to this. Let's say maybe 50 by 50. Then I'll go back to the beginning and then play again. I made exactly the same mistake again with this emitter here. I didn't add this one here, to the tracer. That's why I'm not getting the traces. So I'll stop the playback. Select this emitter, which is emitter number 29, and also this one here, which is 30. So I'll add these two, emitter 29 and 30, to the tracer. So I'll come back down for the last time to the tracer, lock the panel, scroll back up, select the two emitters, and add these to this list. If I now go back and then rewind and play, those should be traced as well now. When I'm happy with the result, I will stop the playback, let's say here. And then we can do a preview. And just fly to a different angle, start the preview. And here's what we have. I can now go and turn on the streaks maybe. And then bring the intensity down a little. And then maybe the softness up a little. I'll also bring the flare intensity down. And maybe the bloom intensity up a little bit. I'll come out of the settings. I'll click on the depth of field button here and then set it to be on, say, this E. In fact, I could fly to a slightly better angle. Go here, let's say. And here's the result. Now, if we didn't have this black material here, what would happen is if I scroll all the way down, if I turn off this text with the black material, I would see through this. And if you had any particles in the background, you'd actually start seeing them as well. So if I fly to a different angle here, you can see I'm now seeing what's happening in the background as well. Whereas this text being enabled means that you're not seeing any of those, so they're being blocked. So that's completely up to you, but this is how you can create this effect. I think I'm pretty happy with this, but it would be great to see what you guys come up with what you've just learned. So if you create something cool, please hit me up here or on Instagram and share your work with me as well. Before you go, if you want to enter our weekly prize draw, where you could win a free training course that's fully live and interactive and worth over $1,000, make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications. That's all you have to do. Thanks again for watching the video, and I'll see you on the next one.